Hey, what's going on, Ram fans? Got Paul Walia on board, and we're going to start talking about the draft a lot more. We already talked about tight ends, and today we're going to talk wide receivers in the NFL draft. How you been, Paul?
Fantastic. Getting a chance to watch Senior Bowl and East West Shrine practice and delve a little bit deeper into some of these wide receiver prospects. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and for those of you who maybe weren't around last year, this is an early look, and things will evolve. And I lean on Paul a lot for assessment of college players. Scott Richmond chimes in once in a while as well. But Paul does a great job of diving into all these players. And we also have likes to call us Puka power picks. You know, we got a steal with Puka Nacua, right? And every year there's guys like that, and we try to identify who they might be. Guys that, hey, it's easy to talk about, the top 10 guys, right? And the guys that are going to go in the first, second, third round. What about those guys that are flying under the radar a little bit? Well, after Paul gets through his spiel here, they won't be under the radar anymore. We're going to identify a bunch of them. You ready to go, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's rock and roll.
So the first thing I wanted to present here is now these are, you're going to get a bunch of different rankings, but randomly these are more or less the top 10 guys. And we're not going to talk about all the top 10 guys, but I have highlighted there for you on the podcast. I'll try to keep you up to speed with what we're talking about here. We're going to talk about those guys highlighted: Tre Harris, Jaylen Royals. Actually, I think we added Jaden Higgins as well, didn't we? Savion Williams, who I'm starting to think is one of your favorites, and Tai Felton. And then after that, we'll get to some other names that are starting to pop up on Paul's list, and we'll get to all them too. So these are the first four we're going to talk about: Savion Williams, Tre Harris, Jaylen Royals, and Tai Felton. And, I was going to say, Paul, uh, you know, we heard that Matthew Stafford's returning, and that doesn't necessarily is returning to the Rams, but it sure does sound like it. And I was starting to, get fixated on the quarterbacks that might fall to the Rams. Maybe someone in the second round of the Rams. The Rams don't have a second round pick. Maybe they jump up and draft a Jackson Dart, or maybe one of the second or third round quarterbacks slips to them in the third round. But now that Stafford looks like he's coming back, I'm back on the wide receiver trail here, and I'm actually really eager to talk about some of these guys because, man, some of them would just be great fits for the Rams. And before we get started, these are the four wide receivers under contract for the Rams. Only four: Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Jordan Whittington, and Xavier Smith. And Puka on his rookie deal, he's solid. Cooper Kupp, I think a lot of people thinking maybe the Rams should renegotiate his contract. I've heard trade talk about him. I sure hope he comes back, whatever it takes. And then you got Jordan Whittington and Xavier Smith. What kind of role do you think that this is the year Xavier Smith's role gets elevated a little bit? I mean, we'll talk about the Rams free agent wide receivers in a second, but how do you feel about Xavier Smith's future with this offense?
Yeah, I liked Xavier Smith. I thought, he should have seen the field more. I did, but the log jam at wide receiver, it was just sort of hard for him to get any playing time. He did have that one. That fair catch we all know about the playoff game. That was just in the snow. But he's got to shake that off. And if the Rams still have confidence in him, he could make an impact. He has shown the ability that he can take it to the house. He's a dynamic punt returner. He has shown on those shallow crosses and some of these routes that allow him to use his yak ability, that he has that breakaway potential. So it very possibly could be, if you take a look at this and the way this shakes out, if Cooper Kupp winds up not being on the roster next year, wide receiver just jumps to the top of the list. It becomes a major priority for the Rams. And the Rams have shown that they are not hesitant to play rookie wide receivers. They've shown that. So that's why we really, Ram Nation, when we were taking a look at some of these players, some of these we'll highlight the ones that are, sort of Mark's favorites, my favorites, but we try to really see, like, from a realistic standpoint, what fits with the Rams personnel types, their philosophies, and what they've done in the past with their wide receivers.
Yeah, and what throws a little wrench into the works is, we've been saying all along, get Jordan Whittington some more touches, get Xavier Smith some more snaps, and diversify the offense. And Ian and you have been arguing that for months. And then you heard Sean McVay the other day, one of the things that held them back is, they when guys get dinged up, they don't have the bodies that can fill that specific role. So he wants to diversify the offense, I think, to give the team more flexibility when guys do get dinged up. I don't know if that's good news for Xavier Smith. Maybe it is, but man, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer. I think Sean McVay, as brilliant as he is, may have been kind of painting himself into a corner over the last 2 years by just being so predictable in his, alignments and play calling. But I assume that you and Ian are both on, both probably feel the same at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's no question about it. Jay Witt's going to be the WR3 next year, right? If Cooper Kupp is not on this team, he, by not just by default, but he's just that talented. So he'll be the WR3. The question really revolves around, are they going to bring back Demarcus Robinson? That's going to be the issue. Based on everything that's happened this season, right? He had that incident, the DUI. So that may sort of cloud that a little bit. However, if he does come back, if your trio winds up being Puka, Demarcus, and Jay Witt, then your WR4, you could take a close look at that. But if the money that they're going to have to spend to retain Tyler Johnson and Demarcus Robinson is really not a lot. Then the other question becomes, what do you do with Tutu? The versatility that he's talking about when we talk about wide receivers, Ram Nation, could be, we don't know, because in Sean McVay speak, it's very different than any other type of language. So is he talking about versatility, wide receivers being able to play outside as well as the slot, that X, Y, Z, to have that what we call position versatility when you talk about wide receivers? Some players are exclusively slot receivers. That's where they do the best work. Then there are some receivers that can play outside and inside. Someone like Puka is a great example of that. And when we were talking about it during the season, we were saying that one of the issues that was popping up over and over again, that Cooper, right, Super Cooper only plays the slot. That's where he does his best work. Therefore, the only other openings are on the outside positions. Now, depending on the situation, you could always move players around. Just because a person's a slot receiver doesn't mean they have to line up in the slot all the time. So when he's talking about versatility in wide receivers, what he's probably referring to is the ability, bringing in receivers that can hit all three, the X, the Y, and the Z. And I think that's what he's referring to. I think he's spot on about that.
Yeah, and for those on the podcast, the Rams' three unrestricted free agent wide receivers, Demarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell, and Tyler Johnson, and they combined for 99 catches, 1,358 yards, and 8 TDs, 7 of those belonging to Demarcus, of course. Another reason why it might be prudent to bring him back if they can. So let's talk about these wide receivers in the draft. The first one on our board here, Tre Harris out of Ole Miss. 6'3", 210 pounds, runs a 4.55. Tell us about Tre Harris. What do you like about him?
So Ram Nation, so the 6'3", 210 is the official from the weigh-in. So we know a lot of these players are at the Senior Bowl and at the East-West Shrine. So he also has a 77-inch wingspan, which is about average. Hand size was about average. He's from Lafayette, Louisiana. He was a high school quarterback. Why is that important? Why are we talking about his high school quarterback days? Who was his high school wide receiver? Malik Neighbors. So that's why we're talking about his high school days. So this guy's used to hanging out with stars. He went to Louisiana Tech as a wide receiver. He was a 2-star recruit for 2 seasons. Then he transferred to Ole Miss. In his sophomore season, he scored 10 touchdowns on 65 receptions. Transferred his junior year, 54 catches with 8 TDs. Senior year, 60 catches, 1,030 yards, 7 touchdowns with a healthy 17.2 yard average. So you see the level of consistency there. So what are the pros? When you look at Tre Harris, first of all, you got to take a look at the size. There are not too many players with his size that can get up and sky for the football. He excels. That's his reputation at a high pointing the football and catching the ball away from his body. Many of the scouts have already commented of that he is not a body catcher. He is a natural hands catcher. The minute you put that into print, you can watch a kid skyrocket in the rankings. And that's why Tre Harris has just skyrocketed in the rankings. So that's a huge, huge positive trait that NFL scouts look for. He is a monster in the red zone. He uses his size well, especially on those fades, those back shoulders. And one of my favorites, and which is why we're saying, when we talk about this Ram philosophy, he loves to block. He's publicly said it. I love to block. When the coaches talk about him, they say that he loves to block. The negatives are in the Ole Miss offense. It is a limited route tree, but you could pretty much say that for a lot of these wide receivers, Mark. I think they put that for pretty much all the wide receivers, right? Because when you have a player of this size at the college level, basically, what are you trying to do? You're trying to exploit him. He's almost like a power forward in basketball. Put it up there and let him go get it. Let him just bully everybody else. So at this point, he may rely too much on his size, but you do see that. And where does that show up, Mark? Well, that compromises when people are looking to see if you can separate. So the questions that they have about Tre Harris and pretty much every large wide receiver coming out of college over the last, decade is that ability to separate, that ability to beat the press at the line of scrimmage. Can they beat press coverage? And does he have that elite speed? So that did not show up a lot on tape, that him just watching Tre Harris run away from people. So he's a player that when we go for the dash for cash, as they call it, the combine, so his combine numbers are going to be huge for him, So I think he's a great wide receiver prospect. I think he just has that natural knack of body control. So Ram Nation, when you watch him, don't just watch the highlights, watch the entire game. He has a natural feel for football. This kid is a football player. He likes the physical element of it, and I think that's a characteristic. We're talking about, our superstar Puka, right? That's just something that, not all wide receivers have. And when you have a wide receiver with that physical element, with that physical mindset, it's a huge advantage. He's already halfway up the chart to success. So I think Tre Harris is a legitimate prospect. The only downside is I think he's going to do well at the combine. I think he's going to be out of the Rams' reach.
Yeah, he's not going to go in the first round, but he'll go in the second round for sure, I think. Late second.
We'll see. These big wide receivers, they are really, really sought after in the NFL now. So it's a hard call. Sometimes they get penalized because their 40 times are not the greatest. We saw that in this previous draft, right? But I'll be surprised if he makes out of the first round. I really will. If he has a great combine, I'll be surprised.
Yeah, it's predicting what McVay is going to do with that first round pick unless Snead, it's really hard to say at this point. Is they're going to jump on I think they could still draft a tight end. They could draft a wide receiver. They could trade back. I don't see them trading up, but yeah, we'll have to see.
The other thing about this wide receiver class, Mark, which is going to be interesting, it's unique in the sense that you don't have a lot of these eye-popping prospects. So it's sort of weird. As players are getting elevated, it creates that gap sort of in the middle. So you have prospects up top, you have prospects that we're going to talk about that are undervalued, but not too many in that middle tier of the draft, because a lot of those middle tier prospects are going to wind up getting elevated. So this draft is going to be weird. Either you get your, the receivers you love early, or then you're going to have to wait a little bit and grab them late.
Yeah, there could be a big run on wide receivers and then a lull and maybe that second wave into the third round and one of them falls to the Rams. Let's talk about the next guy. Who do we got? I know I'm talking to you offline. I have a feeling this is one of your favorites, Savion
Oh,
Williams out of TCU. Another big wide receiver, huh?
yeah, a legitimate size there too. He was listed as 6'4" and change, 225. Holy moly. This kid is an absolute monster. He's one of my favorites. When you watch him in games, it's just a matter of time before he just takes one to the house. He is a Texas native, 3-star recruit. He played quarterback as a high school senior. He returned kicks at TCU during his freshman year in 2020, then took over a starting role in 2022. He finished that year with 29 receptions and 4 touchdowns. And then he put together a season of 41 receptions, 4 touchdowns, and 500 yards. And then a season of 60 catches, 600 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So what do we always talk about? That progression. We want to see the receivers be consistent and get better. And that is what he has done. He also added 51 and 6 on the ground. That's 51 touches with 6 touchdowns on the ground. So he gets it done when they give him the ball. He turns into a running back. He has solid size, solid length. This is what I love about it. We just talked about alignment versatility, being able to hit the X, the Y, and the Z. He can play outside without an issue, tough as nails, excellent catch radius. We talked about this with the tight ends. My favorite characteristic is the catch radius. Ask any quarterback how they feel about their wide receivers' catch radius. He has increased his receptions every successive season. He can do it on the ground as well as the air. This particular year, 12 total touchdowns, 6 and 6, 6 in the air, 6 on the ground. Strong hands, can high point the football. Crazy acceleration from stop to from a dead stop. He can just get it up to high gear. The only downside is that, as a wide receiver, he didn't get a chance to run the full route tree at TCU. The way they utilized him was really to get him the ball in space and let him just outrun the defense. So he really has to develop that wide receiver IQ and that feel for the passing game. But I think, and this is my opinion, what do you think, Mark? What do you think Coach Yarber would do with a kid like this? This kid would be what? A superstar within a season or two?
Yeah.
He would teach him the nuances of that. So, some of the things, Ram Nation, what are we referring to? Like moves off the line to get free in terms of running his routes. He's a decent blocker, but he definitely can improve his blocking, but he does like to block. The one issue that really stands out when they talk about Savion Williams has been his drops, his concentration drops. This year, unofficially, they have him down as 8 drops. Now, Mark, for 60 receptions, that's a lot. But once again, you have to take a look at how they're utilizing him. So I think this is a kid that is completely undervalued. He's getting a lot of hype, which is great. But I think if you take a look at a lot of the different pundits, his draft position's all over the place.
Right.
I think this is a player that is definitely going to be undervalued. And taking a look at who we have as our wide receiver coach, the Rams wide receiver coach, and the work he has done with Jay Witt, King Kupp, right? Puka. He has a track record. All right. When we had Robert Woods, this kid, you hand this kid over to Coach Yarber, his nickname's gonna be Savion Superstar Williams.
Nice. Yeah, one thing that I consider the Rams might do, they've been so successful, waiting on wide receivers, and maybe they do that again, and maybe they pass on the highly ranked guys. But yeah, maybe I've noticed that too. I've seen Williams mock late first and then in the third and fourth. So
exactly. So I think as we get closer to the combine and post combine, as these things start to solidify and as the thinner positions start to really unfold, which I think up top, I think wide receiver is fairly thin. So this kid has a potential to either go through the roof in terms of the rankings or remain undervalued where the Rams could really pull off a Brinks job.
okay, let's move on to Jaylen Royals, Utah State, 6 feet 205. 4.38 speed. So this guy is more, Jaylen is more in tune with the typical measurables of a Rams wide receiver, maybe a little bit faster than Puka and Cooper coming out of college for sure, but 6 feet 205. He's kind of in that wheelhouse that they've been typically draft. How do you feel about Jaylen Royals out of Merlin Olsen's alma mater?
That's right. So you know what's interesting? So this kid, he lettered in football, basketball, and track and field. So when we talk about this kid and his ability to run, it's totally legitimate. So when he was in college as a senior, he had 26 catches for 455 yards and 4 touchdowns. He committed to play college football at Georgia Military College. Okay. He didn't really blow up. He exploded on the scene when he transferred to Utah State in 2023. He played all 12 games, made 68 catches for 1,023 yards and 15 touchdowns. He was ranked second on the team in receptions. Mark, his 15 touchdown receptions set a new single-season school record. But more importantly, his 7 touchdowns of 50-plus yards led the nation. This is the kind of kid that he gets the ball in his hand and he just keeps on running. He has that style of football. When you watch him play, what's really interesting, they ran a lot of – it was like watching that old West Coast offense. They would just run him on slants, and he just has this uncanny knack where he would just get that inside leverage and he would just show his numbers to the quarterback, right? And he would just catch this ball and it was off to the races. And it was done over and over and over again. The defense knew it was coming, but he just ran it with such perfection. Unfortunately, in 2024, he had a season-ending foot injury in October. But prior to that, he had already, by October, Mark, he had already racked up 55 catches for 834 yards in only 7 games. He had a 30-plus yard reception in 4 of his senior year games with 6 touchdowns. That shows his big play ability. Jaylen Royals is legitimately a big play wide receiver. He's got a great build. Look at those dimensions. So he is officially listed at 5'11", 208. Mark, think about that. 5'11", 208. This kid is not only fast, right? He is put together. Like I said, he makes his living ripping the inside leverage on D-backs and then squaring up his body to the quarterback. He gives the quarterback a great target. Really has that. He has great football. Of any wide receiver in this class, he's number one when it comes to football IQ. No question about it. Just watch the way he runs routes. Watch the way he attacks the zone. He's a dynamic playmaker once the football in his hands. Rarely goes down on first contact. Who does that sound like? That's very Puka-esque. Rarely goes down on first contact. So he is a quarterback's dream. He's reliable and he's quick. He loves those quick hitters. If anything, Utah State definitely fed him the football with those quick hitters. So some of these numbers might be bloated. That's been a big criticism of his. But I think from what I've seen, he has enough long speed to stress cornerbacks on those vertical routes. He's a great route runner from what I've seen. He's another player, like we said, doesn't have the full route tree. But, some of these basic routes that he's running it with such crispness and attention to detail. Coach Yarber, here's another project for you. So I think Jaylen Royals would be tailor-made for the Rams. He can play outside. He can play in the slot. I know they're questioning his speed. I have no doubt in this kid's ability to run.
Yeah, the time's there, 4.38. And, I think I've done 3 mock drafts, participated in at least 3, maybe 4, one with Scott. And in 2 of the ones that I did, 3rd round, Jaylen Royals just falls on my lap there, and I've selected him both times. He's this is using the NFL mock draft database, so it's not not great evidence, but suggests that he could be there in the 3rd round if the Rams want him.
tailor-made for the Rams, right? The one thing with him is going to be the medical, how the medicals come back, because his injury was to his foot. That always scares a lot of NFL scouts. So let's see how the medicals come back. If he gets the green bill of health, he is doing one of the showcases. So, let's see how it turns out for this kid. But I just love to watch this kid play football.
All right, on to Tai Felton, Maryland, 6'2", 181. Sounds kind of lean and mean there, right? 4.61 40 time. Tell us about Tai Felton.
Yeah, so his running mate at Maryland was actually one of my favorites, but we included Tai because we were saying that, when the Rams are looking for certain types of players, he is a player that might be very appealing to the Rams. So his official size measurables came out to 6'1", 185, right? He's called the Maryland Speedster, right? So they call him Tai Track Meet Felton. So he was a 3-star recruit out of high school, 2.5 years of starting experience with Maryland, became a full-time starter in 23. Look at his receiving line was 48 catches, 723 yards, 6 touchdowns, a very healthy 15 yards a catch. First team all conference honors this past year, which was a breakout season for him. Listen to these numbers: 96 receptions, 1,124 yards, 9 touchdowns. So in terms of positives, if you take a look at alignment versatility, he has experience playing the slot. Mark, he spent 25% of his snaps playing the slot. Not bad, right? The rest of the time he was at the boundary with success, largely at the Z. He's improved, what we said, from junior to senior year. That's something that we said was really, really important. Maryland used both their receivers in sort of like I don't want to say unusual, but I would say atypical for the type of receivers they had. They ran a lot of slants, a lot of screens, a lot of outs. So, which was surprising for a receiver with his speed. So he's another one that needs to develop the ability to run the full route tree. It would have been nice to see him go vertical a little bit more, but he did show solid acceleration, long speed. He does have the ability to make defenders miss. That's important for Mark. For a lot of these speed receivers, some of them are very straight line type receivers. He definitely shows that he's got the wiggle to make defenders miss. So when we start talking now about some of the negatives, well, the scouts, they love to use the term negative. I don't really see them as negatives. I mean, it is what it is. They say his size and frame is somewhat average at 6'1", 185. I would say there are a lot of receivers with that size and frame. He needs to improve his toughness and yak ability. So that is something that is definitely was consistent. He went way down too easily on first contact. So if he wants to, that's something the Rams are probably going to look at. They would love to see him run through some arm tackles and try to take it to the house. He had 8 drops this year, and he needs to improve that. And he definitely needs to escape the tight press coverage at the line. That was something that he struggled with. So there are definitely some areas that need to be improved. But when you're looking at, like I said, a wide receiver crop that is sort of light up top, he is one of the first, if you want to say, turn and burn guys that comes up, and that's Tai Felton.
Okay, yeah, well, I think we have his teammate up here coming up soon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So I put this together based on the research that I had and the data I've been showing on the screen here. Just try to kind of tail the tape of the 4 guys we talked about. And I gave the size speed trophy to Williams, Jaylen Royals, the best hands, Felton with the best yards after carry. And you feel free to disagree with me, Paul. I just put this together based on what I was reading. Versatility, Williams and Royals. Athleticism, Williams. Blocking, Harris came out on top. And then intangibles, Royals and Felton. And take that for what it's worth. We'll, based on the, I pull information from various draft sites, watch a little bit of film, but we'll take Paul's word over mine on any of these assessments. This is, remember, we're just getting started on this. And by the way, in case any of you missed it, We already did tight end, so go check out that video. And I don't know what we're going to do next. I'll let Paul decide which position group we want to talk about next. But we'll be doing, one every couple of weeks leading up to the draft. So here's some other guys. These are your early Puka Power picks. You reserve the right to change your mind. And we have 3 guys listed, Matthew Golden. And this is just page 1. There's a couple more coming up. This is, we have Matthew Golden out of Texas, who seems to be rising up some draft boards. Caden Prather, the Felton's teammate at Maryland, and Jack. And we're deliberating how to pronounce his last name. We've decided it's Jack Besh out of TCU. So walk us through these 3 guys.
Yeah, so these 3 guys are definitely not going to be coming off the list. They are definitely Puka Power picks. So I'm loving these 3 guys. So not in any particular order. Just to before we go through them, just a reminder: the Puka Power picks, a lot of them, early on, we identify them as players that show things like, for example, the ability to play well in the clutch, toughness, things of that nature, intangibles that they bring to the team. That's what we prioritize. And unfortunately, what happens many, many times is that the other criteria that I always like to say is, like Mark pointed out earlier in the segment, is that we're not just looking for the guys where it's obvious, like a top 5 pick, right? We're looking at guys that weren't getting talked about earlier in the season, but now, based on their play, they might get super elevated, like Matthew Golden, right? So let's talk a little bit about 3. Since we just talked about University of Maryland, shout out to the Terrapins, right? Let's talk about the running mate, Tai Felton's running mate, Caden Prather. So he is one of my favorites. I love this kid's potential. Official listing on him, Mark, this is official, 6'3", 210. You got to love that size. So he attended Northwest High School in Maryland, out in Germantown. He had 844 receiving yards as a junior. He was rated as a 4-star recruit. He committed to play college football for West Virginia. And, he went to West Virginia and then transferred to Maryland. He played for Maryland and put together a season, his first season, 42 for 665 yards and 5 touchdowns. Before finishing his collegiate career with 56 catches, 624 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He established a reputation for going high and snatching the ball away from defensive backs. There you go. That's exactly what we're looking for, right? The ability to attack the football, high point the football. So he's already established that reputation. He was their top red zone threat. So that's something that was a major check that box off. He's a big, well-built wide receiver. From everything that I've seen, he has the strength, the focus, and the body control. I want to talk about the focus for a little bit. You can throw it up, and there are all sorts of different things happening, right? Defensive backs hanging all over you. The ability to focus and to block all that out and still make the catch, that was something that stood out when I watched him on film, and I really, really thought that was special. He can consistently move the chains. That was another aspect. So it wasn't just in the red zone. He was able to get them clutch first downs. And like I said, great body control. There were a couple of times twisting and turning down at the sideline, going up in the air and coming down with a foot in bounds. I thought that was really fantastic. He has shown the ability to improve from year to year. He improved in drops. So Mark, last year he had 8 drops. You know how many drops he had this year? 1. There you go. So very, very important. So the ability to work on those, your areas of deficiency and improve upon them, something great. There you go. There's a little bit of evidence. I loved his competitiveness. He has that eye of the tiger. He also has that yak capacity, something that he could further develop. When people talk about, well, what are some of the drawbacks? Well, Maryland, like I said, they use their wide receivers in a very unique way. Mostly, in his case, mostly hitches, curls, and whip routes. His long speed wasn't really showcased. So his athleticism doesn't really show up until you see him make one of these spectacular catches. But, when you watch him in the game, he's a willing blocker. He's got great size. I think he would be dangerous. So the area where he really has to develop now is that intermediate area where the Rams really covet, right? those digs, those outs. So I think that's something, and obviously those posts. So that's something I think this kid will have no problem mastering. I think he would be a great fit for the Rams wide receiver room. I love his size. I love his tenacity. He has all the intangibles that would make him a success in Horns. Absolutely.
And who you got next here?
The next one I want to talk about is I want to talk about my buddy. Let's talk about my buddy Besh, because he's one of my favorites. So the first thing, just want to point out, so Ram Nation, just, from the Rams Up crew and the rest of Ram Nation to the Besh family. Besh's older brother was one of the victims of the horrific incident on New Year's Eve in New Orleans. So first off, we just want to pass along our condolences to Tiger Besh. So this kid is just I think it's a slam dunk. If he's available, I think the Rams are going to grab this kid.
At what point in the draft do you think?
So it's tough to say. So when you take a look at his background, so he started out at LSU as a tight end. He got injured, and what was sort of like a backstory of that was, and it was almost like a running joke at LSU, was, is he a wide receiver or is he a tight end? So some people say he transferred because he wanted to get a chance to play wide receiver. Some people say it was because of the injury. It's all urban legend at this point. So, he transferred to TCU. If you look at his size, he is legitimately at 215. So he's definitely, I don't think he's over the top at being a wide receiver at 215. He's slightly under 6'2". He came in at 6'1" and 5/8. So, I could see him going. I could honestly, depending on how he tests out at the combine and everything that he's shown thus far, and we'll talk about his positives, Mark, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody takes him in the 3rd or 4th round. Not at all. Especially if he puts up a ridiculous 40 number. So let's talk about him for a little bit. So he's a great prospect. He is a Louisiana native. He played both wide receiver and tight end. He won state titles in his junior and senior year because he also played basketball, right? And he also won a state championship as a junior. He was a first-team all-state selection in both his junior and senior years. Pretty impressive, Mark, right? He played for the school's basketball team. Listen to this, Mark. They won 3 consecutive state championships.
Wow.
So this kid is used to walking off the field and looking up at that scoreboard and seeing his team on the winning side, right?
And we know Puka Nacua can play in the NBA, at least according to Puka. So maybe. And
he made that very clear when he dunked the basketball, right? According to him, that's the only skill you need to score in the NBA.
Yeah, maybe Jack and him can play for the Lakers a little bit. We'll see.
So the Rams will have the best pickup squad in all of Los Angeles. So he was a 4-star recruit, top 10 player in Louisiana. He received offers from LSU, Mississippi State, Notre Dame, Texas, TCU, Vandy. Like I said, he started out with LSU before transferring over to TCU. He's a hybrid type player. What I love about this is that he desperately wants to play wide receiver. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to utilize him as a traditional wide receiver. So he's super physical. The first thing that jumps off when you watch him is that he is super physical, and his blocking will just make you pause it and rewind. He is blowing people up. He loves to do where he is motioned into the line. He loves to go downfield and block. Like I said, super physical. His yak ability is off the charts. Once he gets the ball in his hands, Mark, he cannot be tackled with just one person. He's an unselfish team player. He's the type of player, I'll tell you why he's a great pick for the Rams. He's not the type of player that only flourishes in a high volume system. Do you know what I mean? There are some wide receivers, they need the ball funneled to them to be successful. They can't go 6 or 7 downs without touching the ball. He's not one of those players. So I think he would be a perfect complementary wide receiver in the Rams wide receiver room. I see him as one of those. I think this is a common position in the NFL. It's going to be even more common moving forward. He is going to be a great power slot for the Rams, a big slot. Why would that be beneficial for the Rams? Mark, guess who we could move off of the slot every now and then? Puka, and save a little bit of wear and tear, because you don't lose anything in the blocking. I mean, there's no way this kid is going to be in the same class as Puka in terms of pass receiving. But in terms of a developmental wide receiver with the potential to give you a lot of bang for your buck in his rookie season, this is the kid. He destroys zone coverage. He has a natural feel for being a wide receiver and developing that sort of, if you want to say, that connection with the quarterback. He's one of those kids we talked about, always open, like your boy from last year, McConkey, right? Always open. Football IQ is off the charts, and a natural leader on the field. He can play outside, and there's a lot of tape on him playing outside and being successful. And he can play inside. The only question that people always bring up about a player of this size at wide receiver when they play outside is, does he have enough top end speed to break man coverage and to get off the line? This kid is super physical. I think he would have no problem handling that press coverage. So I think if there's any one receiver in this draft that is tailor-made for the Rams, this kid is it.
Yeah. Now, the next guy, Matthew Golden, he's been rising a little bit on the draft boards I've seen, but you really like this guy as well.
Yeah, so you remember when we were watching the college football playoffs, I said this kid, if he ever came to the Rams, and what did he do? He wound up catching the touchdown and making that huge play, right? That sent it into overtime. So, I really like this kid. And one of the things that really stood out for me is that he has that combination of speed. He's a natural wide receiver. The kid can do it all, man. He runs great routes. He's just electric. He's got speed to burn. He is from H-Town. Shout out to H-Town, right? And he went and attended Klein Cain High School, where listen to this, Mark, 167 receptions for 3,200 yards and 32 touchdowns, while also rushing for another 4 touchdowns. That's quite a career, right? He initially committed to play college football at Texas Christian, and then he later switched commitments to the University of Houston. 33 starts between Houston and Texas. In 22, 38 receptions. In 23, 38 receptions. And 58 receptions in 24. Okay, there you go. There's that consistency. He was a one-year starter at Texas. He led the team, like we said, with 58 receptions, 9 touchdowns. And Golden was golden when the lights were brightest. He came up big in the playoffs time and time again for Texas. Came up with big play after big play. In terms of his size, he weighs in. Officially, he's at 6 feet 195. That is not small at all. Great long speed, great burst. He's able to create explosive plays in the blink of an eye. And his route running ability, Mark, I was really, really impressed. For a speed receiver, he knows how to throttle it up and down. That is the key, Mark. When you have that kind of speed, you have to know when to put it in full gear and when to keep it in third and throttle up and throttle down. So I really like that about him. So he's not just a deep threat. He's solid wide receiver in all areas of the field. He knows how to move the chains. He knows how to get open underneath. He knows how to get open in those intermediate ranges to keep the defenses honest. Solid hands. From what I saw in big games, he just wants the ball. Well, what's going to be the one knock against him? Well, his injury history. So he's missed he's battled injuries a couple of years over the past few seasons. In total, not too many missed games. He got 5 missed games prior to 24. He got hurt again in that Ohio State game. We saw that he missed a significant amount of time. His concentration dropped over his career, 14 drops over the last 3 seasons, but career low 3 drops this season, Mark. All right. That's
So
something you
he's
got to work.
improving. Yeah.
That's it, right? You put in the work. That's exactly what we want. His run blocking is not the best. I think the term that was used was lackluster, but he definitely is a willing blocker. He just has to, make it a priority. And listen, look, when he comes to the Rams, that's going to be a priority. The kid is clutch. He can play the Z. He can play the slot. He can play the X from day one. His speed is undeniable. Talent is through the roof. Problem is, Mark, like you said, he is not just rising. He is flying, and he's a hot commodity, and it's just going to go higher because I think he's going to have a great combine. I think he's going to be out of the Rams' target range, but I really like him. He's one of the, technically he doesn't meet the criteria for Puka power pick because he's going to be wind up being in the top 20, 25. But listen, this kid, he's got a lot of the intangibles that you don't often find for a player with his type of speed. So I like Matthew Golden.
Yeah, we put this together originally a couple of weeks ago. It might have even been longer than that. We've kind of been working on this. And at the time, Matthew Golden probably qualified as a Puka power pick. And, that's the problem with identifying these so-called sleepers is when they start to show they're not sleepers anymore. It kind of makes you look smart, but at the same time, you're like, dang it, we're not going to be able to draft him now. So double-edged sword, I guess.
Yeah,
So
we said that about Jared Verse, and look what happened. Jared Verse wound up falling into our lap. So you never know.
Right. And what else do we got? You have three other guys that you wanted to talk about. Pat Bryant out of Illinois, Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, and Ja'Cory Brooks out of Louisville.
So, Mark, I'm not a big comp guy. I don't like to make comps. I like to, give wide receivers their due. I mean, all players, right? I like to give them their due and let them carve out their own niche. But Pat Bryant is one of my favorites. Ram Nation, watch this kid play a game, man. And you're going to be like, all right, I see where he was going with this one. So he went to Atlantic Coast High School in Jacksonville, Florida. During his high school career, 128 receptions, 2,261 receiving yards, 23 touchdowns. He committed to the University of Illinois in Champaign to play college football. As a true freshman at Illinois in 2021, 6 receptions for 98 yards. As a sophomore, he started 11 of 12 games, 34 receptions. As a junior, 43 receptions and 7 touchdowns. And then he returned to Illinois, became the number 1 receiver senior year, 2024. Why do I love this? For those of you, the Illini fans out there, you saw the season video, the team video. It started with the coach talking about this kid. He was named the team captain, Mark. There you go. 54 receptions, 984 yards, 10 touchdowns. Talk about a positive progression. There you go. He is a physical and tough receiver. He can dominate from the slot. He has more than enough athleticism to win on the outside. This kid loves to block. When they interviewed him, that's the first thing he said. I love to block. He has that high football IQ. He knows how to move the chains. He was the go-to guy to get those clutch first downs. And he gained a reputation for red zone big plays and getting those clutch touchdowns for his team. He does his best work when the ball is in the air. When you watch him, when the ball is in the air, he's already going up to attack the football. And once he gets it in his hands, this is what I love about him. He heads north and south, man. There's no joking around. He wants to take it to the house. He wants to rack up as many yards as humanly possible. Once again, like many of the receivers we talked about, what's his 40 time going to be? Can he beat the press coverage? To me, I don't see any issue with that whatsoever. He doesn't have the eye-popping numbers or measurables, but this kid is just, to me, I love his combination of size and athleticism. He's a football player. He's a football player that you want in your locker room. And I think that when it comes to these various scouting reports, that's how I would summarize this kid in one sentence. He's a football player that you want in your locker room. And I know I don't like comps, but I'm going to use this one. Mark, think a taller Robert Woods. That's what this kid is. That's what I see when I watch it play. I was just watching it. I was like, wow, this is who he reminds me of. So he has a lot of those characteristics. I think he'd be another one. He's definitely undervalued. I've been watching him and his rankings and the reports on him, and they've held fairly steady. So let's see how it plays out. This might be a kid that will wind up on the Rams' radar because I think he's going to wind up being definitely undervalued.
Yeah, I'd be there in the mid rounds. And one concern with the Rams is they don't have a 5th-round pick, and that's right in their wheelhouse every year, right?
They do their best work.
I know. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is the year. It's for another discussion, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Rams traded out of the 1st round, picked up a 2nd and a 5th or something. But we'll figure that out another day. So then you have Jayden Higgins from Ohio State, the Cyclones. 6'4", 210, and this was a late ad. You asked me to throw him into the mix just today. So tell us about Jayden Higgins.
Yeah, so he was a player I liked from the beginning, but I wanted to make sure about his actual measurables and everything else. But more importantly, I wanted to see, because Iowa State runs a very interesting system, right? They run a lot of slants, right? A lot of slants and a lot of double moves when you watch him play. So I just wanted to see a couple of things before I formally because I really liked him from the beginning. I think his combination, and we'll talk about it in a second. So officially, Mark, 6'3", 217. Let me say that again. Officially, 6'3", 217.
There's some big receivers in this draft, huh?
Yeah, right? So that's, and there are. So there are, listen, there are a lot of big receivers in college football. The question always comes up, can they run? Can they do all the different things? The thing about wide receivers is, if you want to really break it down, wide receivers are the ultimate multitaskers. If you look on the football field, right, next to quarterback, wide receivers are probably the ultimate multitaskers, because if you think about what they have to do. So he was a 2-sport athlete, basketball and football. Oh, by the way, Mark, 80-inch wingspan. Let me just say that again. 80-inch wingspan.
Wow.
Right? That's impressive. Right? Basketball and football. He attended Westminster Christian School in Palmetto Bay, Florida. He was a 2-star recruit and committed to Eastern Kentucky University to play college football. Played 2 seasons at Eastern Kentucky, recorded 87 receptions and 13 touchdowns. He transferred to Iowa State. In his first season at Iowa State in 23, he started 12 of 13 games, 53 receptions, 983 yards, 6 touchdowns. In the 23 Liberty Bowl, he set a school bowl record with 214 receiving yards in one game. All right, there you go. In 24, 87 receptions, 1,183 yards, and 9 TDs. He was 10th nationally in total receiving yards, right? So this kid put up some serious numbers. So he's not just a huge target. He's got solid hands. He's got acceleration. The kid loves to run downhill. When you watch him play, he's got that Puka love of the game. He's got a smile on his face. He doesn't shy away from physicality. He doesn't run away from tackles. He's looking for contact. He can go up and sky for the ball. He's a true outside receiver with big playability. And what do the Rams desperately need? A true outside receiver with big playability. He scored a TD in 15 of 26 college games. That's pretty impressive, right? He played and the other thing which is really interesting, Mark, what's the connection to the Rams? Who was the offensive coordinator in 2023 for Iowa State? It's Rams assistant coach Nate Scheelhaase, who is now interviewing for other positions, right? So he was the OC at Iowa State. So there you go. There's your Ram connection. So it might be a little inside info in terms of what Jayden Higgins can do for the Rams. So when we talk about some of the drawbacks here, basically, this is what we're looking at. He did not run a full route tree. He was basically used largely on slants and flies. What I thought was really cool, he ran a ton of double moves. So for a young kid to have that experience running all those double moves, that's going to be super useful in the NFL. But he needs to develop that full route tree like we've been talking about for a lot of these receivers. Does he have the deep speed? Does he have the ability to release and those moves off the line against those long NFL man press corners. So that's something that's going to be really, really interesting. And to showcase, that's something that a lot of people are going to focus on. He's definitely a kid that needs some coaching up. But like I said, that combination of personality and size, I think, man, this kid, he would thrive working with Coach Yarber. He really would.
And Ja'Cory Brooks out of Louisville, taller receiver, 6'3", 195. And by the way, I wanted to point out, I wonder, the last big receiver, there's probably been others, but I know Quentin Johnson coming out, he was one of those big receivers.
Yeah.
And I wonder if guys like him, he struggled a bit, right? I wonder if guys like him have actually cooled the market on big wide receivers a little bit. Just a thought. But Brooks is a taller, leaner wide receiver, it looks like, huh?
Yeah, so his measurables actually came in 6'1", 191, which I thought was interesting, right? Because when you watch him, I agree with you. I thought he was taller, but it came up as 6'1", 191, which is still that's no slouch. That is pretty much prototypical of what the Rams draft, right in that range anyway. 6'1", 6'2", 195, right around there. So he's from Miami, Florida. I'll tell you why I like this kid. So, and Mark, I shared a little bit of the trivia with Mark. I love to find these connections, to the Rams or to some sort of, something interesting. Because I think that's sort of, for me, when you look at the intangibles, I think that's important. So Ja'Cory Brooks, from Miami, Florida, he attended Booker T. Washington High School. Junior year, he caught 99 passes for 1,280 yards, 18 touchdowns, Mark, to win the state title. That's bananas. You got to love that. He then went to Alabama, where he had one good season. Then he was beset by injuries. He transferred to Louisville for 2024. He only had 3 catches in 2023 because of injuries. But when he got to Louisville and he got a chance to get healthy, he exploded for 61 catches, 1,013 yards, and 9 TDs with a 16.6 yard average. He was named to ESPN's top 100 players, first team all ACC. Okay. So what was interesting about him is that I think when you watch him, he's definitely a dangerous wide receiver. He's got the length, he's got the speed, and he's got the toughness. You don't get recruited to Alabama unless you are tough as nails. Would you agree? So that's why I think he's another sort of undervalued wide receiver. Listen to this stat, Mark. 11th most yak yards in the country. There you go. When you talk about toughness, he's taking those short gains and he's racking up yards. He had 5 100-yard receiving games. And this was the part I shared with Mark. So he's the 4th Louisville player to have 1,000 yards and 9 TDs in a season. Who was one of the others, Mark? There were only 3 others. One was Tutu Atwell.
Oh, wow.
There you go. And who was the other one? Deion Branch. And then the third was Arnold Jackson. So there you go. So Tutu Atwell is on a very distinguished list, and so is this young kid. So there's your Ram connection right there again. So he consistently, when I watched his, like I said, I don't just watch the highlights, I watch the whole games, which is why it takes a while. But he consistently came up with big plays in big situations for his team. That's what you want to see. Look my way. You want that player to say, look way to the quarterback, look my way, I'm going to be open. He can play outside. To me, he looks at the best when he plays the Z. He could definitely play in the slot. He's a solid blocker. He did have, like we talked about, he did have a career that had in 2 seasons a bunch of different injuries, but he did have a healthy 2024. Once again, his game seems to have developed on those short routes and those deep routes. In the NFL, you really have to learn to develop those intermediate routes for the Rams, those digs and those square outs, not just the deep flies and the underneath routes. This kid is the perfect replacement if Tutu leaves, in my opinion, right? I think this kid would be the perfect replacement. I think he's going to run a surprising 40. This kid is a burner. He has the potential to be much more. He is tenacious, and he has that clutch ability. I think he is the definition of Rams sleeper. So Ram Nation, definitely keep an eye on this kid because this kid I think is going to surprise.
Okay, Ja'Cory Brooks, write that name down, everybody. And now there's 3 other guys that I wanted to talk about real quickly. I'll talk about 2 of them real quickly. These are names that I threw out there, and then you added one as well. And the one guy, I did a mock draft, and full disclosure, my first mock draft, I really didn't know what I was doing. And I just kind of jumped into it and started picking names. Some of the guys I knew, a lot of them I didn't. And I got to I think it was the 6th or 7th round. And I already had one wide receiver, and this Nick Nash from San Jose State was staring me in the face, and I had no clue who he was, and I selected him. And then I went back and looked later on, and afterwards I was like, okay, who'd I draft? And I was like, oh, holy crap, this dude has quite the resume. 6'3", 195, the FCS Triple Crown winner, 1,244 yards, first in the nation, 15 receiving touchdowns, first in the nation, 62 catches, gaining a first down, first in the nation. And I don't know if he's going to be a successful NFL player, but he's worth being aware about because he just struck me as the type of guy, the Rams could draft this guy in the 6th or 7th round. Who knows? And I don't know, was he on your radar, Paul? Or you certainly knew about him, but how do you feel about it? What are his prospects of succeeding in the NFL?
So when you texted me, what was the first thing I texted back? By the way, he was the Triple Crown winner, right?
Right.
So, so what's interesting about him, who he's very similar to from last year? McCaffrey. Because Nash is also a converted quarterback. So this is only technically his first full, or technically his second full season playing wide receiver. Isn't that incredible? So look at the progress he's made.
Yeah, that's one of the reviews I read. It said his trajectory is just incredible from being basically a high school quarterback to all of a sudden being the Triple Crown winner. It's just a guy to be aware of. I have to do some more, watch some more film and see what this guy really brings to the table. But he just struck me as, his resume struck me as the type of guy the Rams would like. And the other one I added was Tez Johnson out of Oregon, and he's gonna give some of you some of you Ram fans maybe minor nightmares back to the year the Rams drafted Tutu Atwell, because Tez Johnson comes in at 5'10", 165, and I added him because my special assistant was messaging me that this Tez Johnson is tearing it up at Senior Bowl practices. And, the Rams love guys that stand out at the Senior Bowl, but I don't know if they're going to if they're going to draft another 165-pound wide receiver. I suspect you agree, Paul.
So I had to break the news to Mark. So his official measurables were 5'9", 156. He came in 1 pound heavier than Tutu. He was officially the 4th lightest prospect in the history of the Senior Bowl, Tez Johnson. However, like I was telling my colleague Mark, that his story is actually a great story. So I think it's worth going over. So I gave him the nickname the Tasmanian Devil. Right? I just think it's natural. I mean, come on. If you're gonna play for the Rams, you got to take one of my nicknames. That's the bottom line, right? So, like for Nick Nash, I already got Nick Nashty, right? That's an easy one. So, Tez Johnson, he was coached by Bo Nix's dad. That was his football coach. So that's the really interesting part of it, and it gets even better. The kid is from Alabama. Tez lost his dad when he was very, very young, when he was an infant. And Bo Nix's parents, yes, Bo Nix, the quarterback, took him in at age 15. So he was a 3-star recruit. He went to play for Troy, and then he transferred to Oregon because he wanted to play with his brother. So right there, listen, let's throw the weight out the window. What a great story, man. What an absolute great story. He played with his brother, Bo Nix, and he was the team's leading receiver, 86 receptions and 10 touchdowns, set single-season Ducks receiving record. Okay? The kid got it done. right? What a great story. It just keeps getting better and better. In 2024, 83 receptions and 10 touchdowns. He's a super quick wide receiver who plays largely out of the slot or in motion. He plays in that Oregon offense, right? He ran mostly short, quick routes where he's used his speed and agility to beat defenders. He was super productive, and he also returned kicks. All right, so when we talk about some of the negatives, what are we going to say? Size, small catch radius, absolutely. Did not break a ton of tackles while he was at Oregon. However, he was super productive. So, and, he's showing again at the Senior Bowl, and obviously it is just the Senior Bowl. It's just the workout. It's not the actual game, and it's not, what we would call an NFL game. However, he is showing that he's got the competitive spirit and the fire to be successful. Now, I love this kid's story. Will he wind up being with the Rams? Who knows? He's got a lot of obstacles to overcome. We saw everything Tutu went through, but he just got a great story, and I just thought I wanted to share that with Ram Nation because I think his story just speaks to why we watch sports for players like this. Man, they just overcome so much.
And if you're a Ram fan, you got to pay attention to the guys that are kicking butt at the Senior Bowl, guys like Braden Fisk, right?
Ram Nation, if you watch the Senior Bowl, you're guaranteed to find at least 3 of the players that the Rams are going to draft.
Right. Okay, and the guy that you threw on here at last minute, how do you pronounce his first name? Is it Antoine Wells?
And I was going by Antoine Wells, and his nickname is Juice. His nickname is Juice.
Yeah, Antoine is a name I'm familiar with. I've just never seen it spelled like that. So let's go with Antoine Wells.
I might be saying it wrong. So everybody just calls him Juice Wells. So every time I was watching his games. So he's from Richmond, Virginia. He's at the East-West Shrine. 6 feet 203. That's where he came in. So rock solid with, if you just take a look at the build, that's right where the Rams like to take their receivers. He did have 5 years of eligibility. He started off at James Madison, and then he played with Spencer Rattler at South Carolina in 22. That's when he had his best season. He was the top receiver there, 68 catches for 928 yards and 6 touchdowns. And then in 23, he hurt his foot and he missed a bunch of time. In 24, he then transferred to Ole Miss. 13 games with Ole Miss, 28, 553, 6 touchdowns. But remember, once again, he's playing opposite Tre Harris. So you don't want to just focus on those numbers. But, Ole Miss, why I like watching him play at Ole Miss versus the South Carolina and his earlier games, Ole Miss used him in a way that what we've been talking about. These players that are not just fast, but they have this combination of size and speed. Ole Miss used him in many more vertical routes, so much so he had the 6th longest depth of target at 17.8 yards in the country because they used him on many more vertical routes. It makes it mark. So there's your illustrative example. They used him, and look at that. He was number 6 in the country at 17.8 yards downfield, average depth of target, something that I thought was really, really interesting. He's a highly competitive player. When people talk about him, coaches, everyone else, that's the first thing they talk about. He is a highly competitive player who is a yak machine. That is how they describe him. So if you describe him that way, you are automatically on my list because that's exactly what I love. He is a clutch performer. Some of the downside will be the injury history. So the medicals are going to be really, really important, and teams that are willing to look the other way on some of that injury history. And right now, he doesn't have all of that walking into the wide receiver room with all those requisite wide receiver skills. He doesn't have that just yet. But once again, when you have probably arguably one of the best wide receiver coaches in the NFL and Coach Yarbs, you don't worry about that, right? Because we know what's going to happen, right? Once he gets his hands on this kid is going to wind up being a machine. So I just love this kid. I think this kid is going to be super undervalued. He is going to be a late round steal for the Rams, and he is going to make them look like geniuses. This kid's got the competitive will that you see in players that are successful in the NFL.
Okay, another name to remember. And I wanted to talk briefly before we wrap things up with, where the Rams might draft a wide receiver, but a bunch of veteran wide receivers, a bunch of veteran free agent wide receivers out there. Stephon Diggs, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen, by the way, is pretty much publicized. He wants to come back to LA to play for either the Chargers or the Rams. Amari Cooper, Chris Godwin, a couple of years. I would have jumped all over that. And then 2 ex-Rams, Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, Marquise Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams, Darius Slayton, KJ Osborne, a couple others. Tyler Boyd is a guy that I also thought might fit the Rams a couple years ago. But I don't know if any of these guys really make sense for the Rams. Who knows? I don't know what price tag they're going to be asking for. But, of all of these, I think I'd want Demarcus Robinson back before any of them. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think it's just a natural fit for Demarcus Robinson to come back. I think also Tyler Johnson too. For the money that they paid for Tyler Johnson, I think people are just continually just sleep on him. I mean, this is a guy, man. He's like a mini tight end out there, man. The physicality, the brute force that he plays with, and he's got great hands. So I think the Rams can really not really have to deconstruct the wide receiver room, but they have enough players there, and if they can hold steady, they can bring in some sizzle in the draft and have a really, really nice rotation, really. So I don't think it's as bleak as at first blush when you look at the wide receiver situation. So I think where it's really going to be, where the pivot really is on what they decide to do with Demarcus Robinson.
Yeah, and the health of Cooper Kupp. Is he? Are they going to restructure his contract? Is he contends that he's still capable of playing some really good football? Where does he fit in? But right now, I think the sure things in this offense are really Puka and Jordan and Xavier Smith to some Jordan Whittington and to some degree Xavier Smith. But I think, in my opinion, they don't have all the comp picks this year, just the one for Raheem Morris. So they don't have that, a bunch of picks like they have in the last couple of years. They could accumulate some picks if they wanted to trade out of the first round. But I could see them drafting 1, possibly 2 wide receivers still if they'd have to accumulate some additional picks to go with 2 wide receivers in this draft, I think. But I wouldn't be surprised if one of those first 3 picks, the first round and the 2 in the third round, one of them is going to be a wide receiver, would be my guess.
Yeah.
Because the reason I say that is, fourth round, yeah, they could go fourth round. And then again, assuming they don't make any moves, which they probably will though, you go from the 4th round to the 6th round. I don't know. I think they'd have to use one of those first 3 picks for a wide receiver.
And it's still early in free agency also. You still have a ton of time in free agency. You still have a ton of time for the post cuts that are really, really, I always think are really, really interesting. But yeah, I think, if you look at this draft, this draft, when it comes to wide receivers, you got some heavy hitters up top, but you got a ton of value at the bottom.
Yeah.
Same thing at running back. Same thing with running back. Running back is really, really deep in this draft. There are a lot of running backs that when you take a close look at them, you're like, wow, there's some really, really nice, and some people like to use that term, rotational running backs that you can make your RB3, and then in a year or two, you would not be surprised if they're an RB1.
Yeah, and you're actually almost making me change my mind. We've identified some really good wide receivers that could be there in the 6th round. So maybe they go that route. Maybe they try to wiggle their way into the 5th round, and they use those early picks. We're going to go all over the place right now, but not knowing what's happening with Alaric Jackson, maybe they need to spend an early pick on a left tackle. That's entirely possible too. So
I think Alaric's coming back. I think you could put your money on Alaric coming back.
Yeah, but that's going to be a real key to this draft. What's happening with Alaric Jackson? Because again, assuming Matthew Stafford is coming back, we need Alaric Jackson, or we need to sign someone like Cam Robinson or draft a high pick in the draft. And there's a couple tackles that I think I'd be okay. Well, maybe we should talk about left tackles next. There's a couple I think that I would maybe feel okay plugging in there on day one at left tackle, but that's a pretty big deal in this offense with Matthew Stafford back there. You better be dang sure they're going to be able to get the job done, or everything falls apart.
And don't be surprised, because they're probably going to give Anopu his walking papers. So don't be surprised if the Rams go for a tackle early in the draft, maybe even round one, to really set them up for, when the Hammerstein Monster decides to retire. So that'd be a nice way, bring back Alaric Jackson, draft because, the reality is, next to quarterback, when the opportunity presents itself and you have that opportunity to take a quality tackle, you have to do it. That's not something, because it doesn't come along all the time.
So you're saying sign Alaric and draft a tackle in potentially the first round as well.
Yeah, and if you look at the Rams tackle situation, then it immediately goes from doom to to much more rosier spectacles.
And there were a lot of things that came together for the greatest show on turf. Bringing over Marshall Faulk, drafting Torrey Holt, signing Adam Timmerman from the Packers, if I remember correctly.
Huge signing.
But Orlando Pace, first pick in the draft, right? And that, I don't know what year that was, but he was he was just a stud, right? And,
he was a rock.
Yeah.
You never worried about the left side, right? That's how you know he's a great tackle. We never talked about that side.
Right.
And shout out to the greatest show on turf, Tom Newton. Remember Tom Newton? Unsung hero of that offensive line. There you go.
Yeah. Well, good discussion, Paul. Maybe. What do you want to do next? Do you want to talk tackles, or you want to talk cornerback? What do you want to talk about next? I'll start putting together some stuff.
Yeah. The Ram Nation, throw some position requests in the comments. We'll hit one of those. My personal favorite is anything on defense. I love to talk defense.
Well,
we could definitely do O-line next. I think there's some really, really interesting O-line. And when we get to D-line and when we get to running backs, Ram Nation, you are going to be shocked at the depth of this draft. There are some real interesting and really impressive mid to late round picks at running back and D-line that are just going to knock your socks off.
Yeah, and we're going to need some linebackers, but it's difficult to talk about inside linebackers with the Rams because they're not going to draft any, right? So what are we doing talking about inside linebackers for? If they draft one, they'll trade them for a 7th round draft pick in 2027 in a couple of years, and then I'll end up with the Seahawks.
Well, you never know. McVay seems to be tweaking the perspective a little bit. I think he sees that it may be time for a little bit of not a wholesale shift, but a little bit of a shift in certain arenas. So we might see that. And I've always taken the position when it comes to the draft that I always say this: you have to take the best player available, right? It's very hard when you draft just for your particular need. And I understand the rationale to some degree, but you cannot fill every, nook and cranny through the draft. That's just, you can't do that.
And
you have to, when the opportunity presents itself, you really have to look at the draft from a value perspective. If the opportunity presents itself, go get the player you want. Look what they did with Fisk. Look what they did with Verse. Look what they did with Corum. Look what they did with Kinchins, right? They got maximum amount of value from the picks that they had, and it paid huge dividends.
Yeah, and there's two great examples of that, and Ram fans may disagree with me, but when they drafted Aaron Donald, I was like, what are we doing? We don't need – our defensive line is fine. And then when they drafted Todd Gurley, I was like, what are we doing? What are we drafting another running back for? We had three, Benny Cunningham. I forget the other guy's names, but we had three decent running backs. It wasn't an area of need, and here we are drafting. I still remember that. I remember that so clearly, and I was like, holy crap! I was excited, but I was really surprised. But both those picks worked out okay.
That's right. So when the best player is available, there's a reason that player is called the best player. So you have to
Right.
sort of maximize your roster, not just so much in filling a need, but making sure your roster is better than everybody else's. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, I got to get out of here. Thanks a lot. And I don't know if we decided, we'll talk about offensive line or linebackers. We'll decide. Maybe offensive line would probably make sense. Not as exciting as some of the other positions, but there could be some guys in the first round that the Rams could be looking at. But
all right.
Okay,
they're
man.
always fun to talk about the big nasties.
Yeah. Okay, man. Thanks a lot. And out here, we'll do it again. Probably be a week or two, but we'll be back at it with our draft position previews. Got tight ends in the book, wide receivers in the book. We'll stick to offense and go with the offensive line, especially the tackle position. Okay, Paul. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
Ramley forever.
All right.